6:15 a.m. in a raging snowstorm, HOA President Priscilla storms up my driveway in her $1,000 Ugg boots, screaming and waving a cease and desist letter. She's threatening $500 daily fines because my snowblower is disturbing the peace on my own property. Total hypocrisy. For 15 years, I've cleared every driveway in this neighborhood, for free. Now this Karen wants to fine me for taking care of my own land?
It's 6:15 a.m. on my property, Priscilla. Completely legal.
No, you're just a grumpy old man who doesn't get modern rules.
Her words hang in the icy air for 2 seconds. Then it clicks. She just picked a fight with a retired land surveyor. And that road she drove on to deliver this threat, she might want to check who actually owns it. What would you do if your HOA tried this? Drop your state below. Got a Karen story? Here's what you need to know about me. Marcus Kellerman, 58, retired land surveyor who's been clearing snow in this neighborhood since before half these houses existed. This corner lot sits on my grandfather's original farm property, 160 acres of Colorado prairie that he worked until 1987. When developers came circling in the early 2000s, my wife Sarah and I kept our 5 acres and watched them build Willowbrook estates around us like we were some kind of historical monument. The musty smell of grandfather's old survey maps still fills my basement office, rolled up in metal tubes alongside my professional equipment. Sarah passed 3 years ago after a brutal fight with cancer, leaving me with an empty house and a grief so heavy I could barely function. That's when the 6 a.m. snowblowing started, not just therapeutic, but essential. The vibration of the engine through my gloved hands, the crunch of fresh powder under steel-toed boots, the satisfying scrape of metal on concrete became my meditation. Every morning for 15 years, I've cleared everyone's driveways for free. Mrs. Henderson with her arthritic hands who couldn't grip a shovel, the Martinez twins who couldn't reach their car seats over snowdrifts. Even Bill's ancient golden retriever learned to expect his morning treat from the crazy neighbor who worked before sunrise. My surveying background meant I knew every property line by heart, every drainage easement, every utility right-of-way. The taste of cold metal from my theodolite eyepiece during boundary surveys, the weight of chain and steel measuring tape. These tools taught me respect for property rights that most people never understand. Then she moved in. Priscilla Thornfield arrived like a conquering army in summer 2020. White Tesla Model X, UC Berkeley law degree, and the kind of calculated smile that makes you check your wallet afterward. Within 60 days, she'd gotten herself elected HOA president during a Zoom meeting half the neighbors couldn't figure out how to join. Her property enhancement initiative started immediately. First target, Mrs. Henderson's 40-year-old rose garden, suddenly classified as non-conforming landscaping. Next, Bill's vintage pickup that hadn't moved in 5 years but somehow detracted from curb appeal. The acrid smell of fresh legal notices became as common as morning coffee. But here's what really made my blood boil. The way she talked to longtime residents like we were museum exhibits. "How charming that you still do manual labor, Marcus," she'd chirp while installing her 6th-ring doorbell to monitor our compliance levels. Her voice had that particular pitch that comes from years of talking down to people she considers intellectually inferior. Her monthly newsletters arrived on cardstock so thick you could build furniture with it. Perfect fonts, embossed letterhead, rules written in legal language designed to intimidate. No RVs in driveways, no visible garbage cans, no unapproved outdoor equipment storage, which apparently included my snowblower sitting in my own garage. What Priscilla never grasped was the difference between a neighborhood and a corporate campus. When you've spent 32 years mapping boundaries, you develop bone-deep respect for property ownership. But she treated the whole subdivision like her personal kingdom, and longtime residents like subjects who needed education in modern community standards. Her daily power walks, always in $200 athletic wear that had never seen actual exercise, included photographing any violations with military precision. Christmas lights past January 15th, sprinklers running 1 minute beyond optimal hours, my coffee mug left on my own front step. That December morning when she stomped through fresh snow in $1,000 boots, waving legal threats like some suburban sheriff, she crossed a line that had been respected for decades. Not just my property line, though that was about to become critically important, but the unwritten agreement that neighbors help neighbors without lawyers getting involved. She wanted to teach an old man about modern rules. What she didn't realize was that this old man had spent his career reading the original maps that showed exactly who owned what in this modern community. Priscilla's first move came exactly 48 hours after our driveway confrontation, a formal complaint filed with Jefferson County's Code Enforcement Division. I found the notice stuck to my front door Tuesday morning right next to where I usually set my coffee mug. The official county seal pressed into cream-colored paper, alleging violation of Municipal Ordinance 847.3, excessive noise during restricted hours. According to her complaint, my snowblower constituted a recurring public nuisance that violated the county's 7 a.m. noise restriction. The irony hit me like ice water. She'd filed a noise complaint against equipment designed to help the entire neighborhood. But Priscilla wasn't finished building her case. By Thursday, she'd organized something she called the Peaceful Morning Coalition. Basically her, 2 other California transplants, and Cranky Bill, who'd apparently switched sides after she promised to overlook his vintage truck. They launched a next-door campaign titled Protecting Our Children's Sleep, complete with Ring doorbell footage of my 6:15 a.m. snowblower operation. The comment section exploded into digital warfare. Mrs. Henderson posted photos of her cleared driveway with the caption, "Marcus is a blessing." The Martinez family shared videos of their twins playing safely in snow-free driveways. But Priscilla's coalition fired back with decibel readings, property value studies, and threats to escalate this matter to appropriate authorities. That's when my 32 years of dealing with municipal bureaucracy kicked in. I'd spent decades navigating county planning offices, and I remembered something from my surveying days about noise ordinance exemptions. A quick trip to Jefferson County Planning confirmed what I suspected. Municipal Ordinance 847.3 had fine print that Priscilla's UC Berkeley law degree apparently missed. The 7 a.m. restriction applied only to non-essential recreational activities. Essential property maintenance was specifically protected between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. under Colorado's Property Maintenance Code. My snowblower wasn't recreational equipment. It was essential winter maintenance, legally protected by the same codes that let roofers start hammering at dawn. Armed with this knowledge, I compiled my response. 15 years of documented community service, photographs of every driveway I'd cleared, and testimony from grateful neighbors. The county dismissed Priscilla's complaint within 24 hours, but not before I noticed something interesting in the subdivision planning files. While pulling municipal records, I'd requested the original plat maps for Willowbrook Estates. Something about Oak Street's documentation looked off. The city classified it as public thoroughfare, but the measurements didn't match grandfather's 1950s farm survey sitting in my basement. That evening, I pulled out his old Leica theodolite, the cold brass familiar under my fingertips as I set up in my front yard. I was supposedly checking my fence line, but actually measuring something far more intriguing. As the precision instrument revealed exact boundary markers, I realized Oak Street wasn't just adjacent to my property. 40 feet of it ran directly across land that had never been sold, condemned, or legally transferred to public use. Every single neighbor had been driving across my private property for 15 years. Just as I was recording the final measurements, Priscilla's Tesla crept past, her phone pressed against the passenger window, obviously photographing my suspicious surveying activity. The irony was delicious. The woman trying to control my property rights was literally trespassing on my land to gather evidence against me. She had no idea she was driving across the very property I was documenting, but her surveillance gave me a perfect photo opportunity of my own. My formal response to the county landed Friday morning like a legal grenade. 8 pages proving my snowblower operation was completely lawful, complete with constitutional property rights precedents and municipal code citations. When the county dismissed her complaint within hours, Priscilla's response was swift and predictable. Saturday's Nextdoor post accused me of weaponizing legal technicalities and intimidating neighbors with surveying equipment. She announced an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss problem neighbor mitigation strategies and declared my property maintenance deliberately hostile to community standards. The smell of battle hung in the December air. That particular mix of diesel exhaust from my snowblower and the expensive perfume Priscilla wore during her daily surveillance walks. She wanted to escalate this into legal warfare, apparently convinced that her law degree trumped my 32 years of property rights experience. Sunday morning, I fired up the snowblower at exactly 7 o'clock a.m., completely legal, but perfectly timed to remind everyone who actually kept this neighborhood functional. As the engine roared to life, I caught sight of Priscilla's silhouette behind designer curtains, rigid with fury at losing round one. She'd started a property rights war with someone who understood property better than she understood neighborhoods. And those measurements I'd been taking were about to turn her morning commute into a very educational experience. Priscilla's emergency HOA board meeting happened Tuesday night, and she'd transformed into a full-scale general preparing for suburban warfare. I wasn't officially invited. Apparently my hostile behavior disqualified me from discussions about my own conduct, but Mrs. Henderson texted me live updates from the back row. Priscilla had prepared a PowerPoint presentation titled Addressing Disruptive Residents' Legal Options and Community Protection. 23 slides. About me. The presentation included photos of my surveying equipment, timestamps of my snowblowing schedule, and what Henderson described as a psychological profile that would make a therapist cringe. Priscilla was suggesting I exhibited concerning antisocial behaviors consistent with grief-related mental health episodes, weaponizing Sarah's death to paint me as an unstable widower who needed community intervention. Her grand proposal? A special HOA assessment of $200 per household to fund a legal defense initiative against my pattern of neighborhood harassment. She wanted every neighbor to pay for lawyers to shut down my snowblowing, but Priscilla had misread the room completely. Mrs. Henderson stood up during public comments and delivered what she later called 40 years of pent-up rage about entitled California transplants. 3 longtime residents followed, pointing out that I had saved them thousands in snow removal costs. The Martinez family showed up with their twins, who apparently asked, "Where's Mr. Marcus?" every morning when they couldn't find me clearing their driveway. The vote failed 4-3. Not exactly unanimous support, but enough to torpedo her legal fund. That's when Priscilla went for the throat. Wednesday morning brought 2 Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies to my porch, looking uncomfortable and holding paperwork about possible elder abuse and mental health concerns. She'd called Adult Protective Services, claiming my erratic surveying behavior and property obsession suggested dangerous cognitive decline. The audacity left me speechless. But these deputies weren't rookies. They'd clearly seen weaponized wellness checks before. After 15 minutes discussing my military service, professional background, and current mental state, they closed the case with a note that I was clearly competent and functioning independently. As their patrol car pulled away, something clicked in my brain. I'd seen this exact pattern during my surveying career. Newcomers moving into established areas, then discovering inconvenient property realities they couldn't change through intimidation. Usually it involved fence lines or water rights, but the psychology was identical. That evening, I found myself in the basement, spreading grandfather's original survey maps across my workbench for the first time since Sarah's funeral. The yellowed paper felt fragile under my fingertips, decades of Colorado dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light. These weren't just family memorabilia. They were legal documents that predated everything Priscilla thought she understood about this neighborhood. I'd been focused on noise ordinances and HOA bylaws, fighting Priscilla's war on her terms. But as I traced the original property boundaries with my finger, following the precise ink lines grandfather had drawn in 1950, I realized I'd been thinking too small. The western edge of the original farm, the strip where Oak Street now runs, had never actually been sold to the subdivision developers. I remembered grandfather telling stories about keeping the back 40 for family access, but I'd assumed that meant the undeveloped land behind the houses. I was wrong. He'd meant the road. Every morning when Priscilla drove her Tesla down Oak Street to deliver legal threats, she was crossing 40 feet of Kellerman family land that had never changed ownership. The subdivision had been built, assuming they'd eventually acquire proper road easements. But 2008's financial crisis killed the developer before the paperwork was completed. For 15 years, 47 families had been driving across my private property twice daily, and none of them knew it. Thursday's certified letter from Hartwell, Morrison & Associates felt like validation. Priscilla had hired a boutique HOA law firm with her own money, demanding I cease all intimidation tactics, including surveying activities and hostile interactions. They threatened restraining orders and civil action for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Reading legal threats while sitting on a property rights goldmine felt surreal. These lawyers were building a case around neighbor disputes and noise complaints, completely unaware they were representing someone who'd been trespassing to file the complaints. Friday evening, I sat in my kitchen with coffee and grandfather's deed, watching Priscilla's headlights sweep across my front window as she returned from another day of building her case against me. The heavy paper felt warm under my fingertips, 70-year-old ink still sharp and legally binding. She thought she was educating an old man about modern community standards. What she'd actually done was give a property rights expert the perfect motivation to dust off some very old, very enforceable legal documents. The war she wanted was about to get much more interesting than noise complaints. Priscilla's desperation reached new heights when I woke up Monday morning to find a Channel 9 news van parked across the street, complete with a perfectly coiffed reporter practicing her lead-in while pointing at my house. She'd actually called the media, on me, for snowblowing. The reporter, Jessica Finley, knocked on my door around 9 a.m. with that particular smile television people use when they smell a David versus Goliath story. The cold morning air carried the diesel exhaust from her news van as she explained her assignment. "Mr. Kellerman, we'd like to hear your side of this HOA dispute that's got the neighborhood divided." I invited her in for coffee, genuinely curious how Priscilla had pitched this. According to Jessica's notes, I was a troubled widower whose grief had manifested as aggressive property maintenance and harassment of young families. Priscilla had painted herself as a concerned community leader, protecting children from my escalating mental health episodes. "Your HOA president seems genuinely worried about community safety," Jessica said, her pen hovering over her notepad. That's when I decided to give her a real story. I pulled out grandfather's 1950 survey map and spread it across my kitchen table, the yellowed paper crackling under the morning light like autumn leaves. The musty scent of old documents filled the room as I traced the property boundaries with my finger. "See this western boundary line? That's where Oak Street runs now." Jessica leaned closer, her media training kicking in as she recognized something bigger than a neighbor squabble. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying 47 families might want to call their title insurance companies." The change in Jessica's expression was immediate, from bored obligation to investigative hunger. She spent 20 minutes photographing the survey maps, asking surprisingly informed questions about easement law. From my surveying days, I remembered that Colorado follows the recorded deed principle. If it's not properly documented and recorded, it doesn't legally exist. When she left, I could see her already crafting a completely different story than the one Priscilla had sold her. But Priscilla wasn't finished escalating. Tuesday afternoon brought her newest creation, a community safety patrol consisting of herself and 2 other California transplants armed with clipboards and measuring tapes. They started by documenting my violations, fence heights, equipment storage, even the placement of my garbage cans. The scratching sound of pencils on paper echoed across the neighborhood as they worked. Mrs. Henderson watched from her kitchen window, shaking her head in disgust. 3 other longtime residents made pointed comments about newcomers with too much time on their hands. But Priscilla's patrol pressed on, convinced they were gathering evidence for some grand legal strategy. The harassment peaked Wednesday when I caught them in my backyard, measuring my garage setbacks without permission. The metallic click of their tape measure rang out as Priscilla explained to her volunteers how unstable individuals exhibit territorial behaviors while literally trespassing on my territory. Something inside me snapped. Not anger, something colder and more determined. Thursday morning, I drove to the Jefferson County Recorder's office with my surveying equipment and 3 decades of property law experience. The familiar smell of aged paper and copying toner filled my nostrils as I requested every document related to Willowbrook Estates development. What I found in those files was better than I'd hoped. Apex Development hadn't just failed to acquire road easements, they'd sold houses with guaranteed permanent access via Oak Street while knowing they didn't own Oak Street. The fraud was documented in bankruptcy filings, incomplete transfer documents, and city planning notes that nobody had bothered to cross-reference. Every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates had been sold property with access rights that legally didn't exist. I spent the afternoon creating a professional boundary exhibit, precise measurements showing Oak Street's location relative to my property lines. The therapeutic precision of technical drawing helped calm the rage building inside me, but Thursday evening delivered the blow I hadn't seen coming. 2 sheriff's deputies appeared at my front door with papers that made my blood run cold, a temporary restraining order. According to Priscilla's sworn testimony, my pattern of surveillance activities and equipment intimidation constituted harassment requiring immediate court intervention. The order prohibited me from conducting surveying activities visible from petitioner's residence, operating power equipment before 8 a.m., or any direct contact with complainant. She'd convinced a judge to ban me from maintaining my own property. "Sir, you understand you can't use that snowblower before 8 a.m. anymore?" the deputy asked, clearly uncomfortable with the absurdity. "Even on my own land?" "According to this court order, that's correct." The taste of injustice was metallic and bitter. As the deputies drove away, I noticed Priscilla's Tesla idling at the end of my driveway, her phone pressed against the passenger window, obviously filming my reaction to her legal victory. Standing there with legal papers in my trembling hands, watching my neighbor document my humiliation from property I'd just proven I owned, I felt something shift inside me. Time to show her what happened when you brought lawyers to a land surveyor fight. The discovery that changed everything happened while I was sitting in my kitchen Friday morning, legally banned from starting my snowblower until 8 a.m., staring at grandfather's deed and feeling utterly defeated. That's when I noticed something I'd missed in 15 years of looking at this document. The property description wasn't just for the 5 acres where my house sits. Hidden in the legal language, buried between heretofore and wherefore, was a phrase that made my coffee grow cold. Accepting and reserving unto grantor perpetual access rights to the western 40-foot strip for agricultural and residential purposes. My hands trembled as I traced the words with my finger. Grandfather hadn't just sold the farm to developers. He'd kept a 40-foot strip of access rights that ran exactly where Oak Street now existed. I'd been fighting Priscilla over noise ordinances and HOA bylaws while sitting on a property rights nuclear weapon. The musty smell of old paper filled my nostrils as I spread the deed flat on my kitchen table, studying every word like it was a treasure map. The heavy ink, pressed deep into fiber by a 1950s typewriter, spelled out something that would change 47 families' lives forever. But I needed confirmation. I called Danny Kowalski, my old Army buddy who'd spent 30 years untangling property law messes for ranchers and developers. "Danny, I need you to look at something. Can you meet me this morning?" He arrived within an hour, took one look at the deed, and went absolutely silent for 3 full minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Jesus Christ, Marcus. Do you understand what this means? Tell me. When Apex Development went bankrupt in 2009, these reserved rights didn't transfer to the homeowners or the city. They reverted to the original landowner. You. That road was built across your private property without compensation, without permission, without any legal easement. The implications hit me like physical blows. Every morning commute, every grocery store run, every trip to school or work. For 15 years, 47 families had been trespassing on Kellerman land twice daily. Danny pulled out his phone and started making calls to the county recorder's office, his voice taking on the excited tone of a lawyer who'd found gold. I need to see the complete chain of title for Willowbrook Estates subdivision. Yes, I'll hold. While he waited, I walked to my front window and watched the morning traffic on Oak Street. Priscilla's Tesla cruised past, followed by young families heading to work, elderly neighbors running errands, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that their road access existed solely at my discretion. It's confirmed, Danny said, hanging up. No recorded easement, no condemnation proceedings, no dedication to public use. The city's been maintaining a road they don't own, providing access to houses sold with fraudulent title guarantees. The power of that knowledge felt intoxicating. After weeks of being painted as an unstable old man who didn't understand modern neighborhoods, I was holding legal documents that proved everyone else had been wrong about everything. But Danny's next discovery made my blood pressure spike. I did some background research on your HOA president while I was at it. Priscilla Thornfield has 3 ethical violations on her California law license, all involving property disputes where she deliberately misrepresented ownership issues. She'd done this before, in another state, to other people. Sitting there with grandfather's deed in my hands, watching Priscilla's morning surveillance drive past my window, I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of this conflict. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute that had gotten out of hand. This was a predator who'd picked the wrong prey. Saturday morning, I woke up with the kind of dangerous clarity that comes from finally holding all the cards in a game you've been losing for months. Danny arrived at 8 a.m. carrying a leather briefcase scarred from 3 decades of property wars. As we spread maps across my dining room table, grandfather's deed, subdivision plats, county records, the weight of what I was about to do settled in my chest like cold lead. "You sure about this, Marcus?" Danny asked, studying my face. "Once you start down this road, there's no backing up. 47 families are going to hate your guts." The question hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. For 15 years, I'd been the neighborhood's unofficial caretaker. Now I was about to become its worst nightmare. "Priscilla made this personal," I said, tracing Oak Street on the survey map. "She wanted to teach me about modern rules. Time for her to learn about old ones." Danny's plan was elegantly brutal. Legal notice to every homeowner, 30 days to negotiate easement agreements or lose road access. Not revenge, just business wrapped in constitutional property rights. Monday's shopping trip to Mountain States surveying felt like preparation for war. The familiar weight of precision instruments reminded me why I'd loved this profession. Everything measurable, everything definitive, everything backed by law and mathematics. Jim Martinez, the shop owner, had heard neighborhood rumors through the surveying community. "Marcus, you really going nuclear on these HOA folks?" "I'm going legal. Sometimes that's the same thing." The laser level and GPS equipment would document every inch of my property boundaries with courtroom precision. When this was over, nobody would question where Kellerman land began and ended. Tuesday brought the most satisfying purchase of my life. Denver Steel and Gate Company specialized in the kind of vehicle barriers that made statements impossible to ignore. The showroom smelled like metal and machine oil, sounds that reminded me of grandfather's workshop. Rodriguez, the sales manager, was a retired Marine who understood the psychology of controlled access. "You want to stop traffic or send a message?" "Both." The gate specifications read like military hardware: 12-foot steel swing barrier, hydraulic operation, keypad access with emergency override, quarter-inch plate steel that could stop a pickup truck mounted on posts anchored 3 feet deep in Colorado clay. "This isn't coming down without heavy equipment," Rodriguez said, marking installation requirements on the contract. That's the idea. Wednesday's permit application at Jefferson County felt surreal. The planning clerk, a young woman whose name tag read Sarah, processed my private property security enhancement request with bureaucratic efficiency. Every time she said Sarah's name, my chest tightened with memory and motivation. "Affected neighbors been notified?" she asked. "They will be, properly and legally." The permit approval took 1 hour. Apparently, installing fortress-grade gates on your own property raises zero official concerns when you follow correct procedures. Thursday morning, I called Jessica Finley at Channel 9. Her investigative instincts had been triggered by our previous conversation about property ownership irregularities. "Jessica, remember that survey map I showed you? The story's about to get much more interesting." "What kind of interesting, Mr. Kellerman?" "The kind that happens when someone finally reads the fine print on 70-year-old property deeds." We scheduled her return for next Friday. Perfect timing to document whatever chaos followed my property rights assertion. But the real weapon was Danny's legal correspondence. Thursday afternoon, we drafted notice of trespass termination letters for every Willowbrook household. The language was clinical and devastating. 30 days to negotiate legal access or find alternative routes to their own homes. Each envelope contained grandfather's deed, current survey documentation, and Danny's business card. Professional, respectful, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood real estate law. "The beauty of this," Danny explained while we addressed envelopes, "is that you're not attacking anyone. You're just clarifying who owns what." Friday evening, I stood in my driveway watching normal neighborhood life flow around Oak Street like water around a stone. Kids riding bikes, families returning from dinner, Mrs. Henderson walking her ancient Cocker Spaniel, all of it about to change forever. The gate components arrived Saturday in an unmarked truck, steel plates heavy enough to require specialized equipment for installation. Pete, the crew chief, had obviously handled sensitive projects before. "You want this installed quiet, or do you want the whole neighborhood to know something's happening?" "I want it installed permanently. The neighborhood will figure out the rest." As Pete's crew began marking concrete locations, I noticed Priscilla's Tesla creeping past during her evening surveillance ritual. She couldn't see the gate components from the street, but the sight of hard hats and surveying equipment on my property triggered her paranoia sensors. She had no idea that her worst fears about my surveying activities were about to become her new reality. Tomorrow, the war she'd started with legal papers and restraining orders was going to become very physical and very permanent. The concrete had barely cured when Priscilla launched her most desperate counterattack yet. Monday morning, I woke to the sound of hydraulic brakes outside my bedroom window. Jefferson County Building Inspector Rodriguez was climbing out of his truck, clipboard in hand, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, Mr. Kellerman. Got a complaint about unpermitted construction. Mind if I take a look?" The inspection was clearly orchestrated harassment. Rodriguez checked my permit documentation, measured the gate installation against approved specifications, and confirmed everything was completely legal. But he spent 45 minutes doing it, making a show of his official presence that Priscilla obviously intended as intimidation. "Someone really doesn't want this gate here," he muttered, signing off on the inspection report. "Someone should have thought about that before filing fraudulent complaints." As Rodriguez drove away, I noticed Priscilla's Ring doorbell army had been working overtime. 3 neighbors emerged from their houses within minutes, phones ready, documenting my interaction with county officials like they were gathering evidence for some grand tribunal. Tuesday brought her media blitz. The Nextdoor app exploded with posts about my escalating dangerous behavior and weaponization of property law against working families. Priscilla had recruited sympathetic neighbors to share stories about potential property value collapse, emergency vehicle access concerns, and the psychological trauma my gate represented to their children. The comment section turned into total warfare. Mrs. Henderson posted a photo of her snow-free driveway with the caption, "Marcus saved my life for 15 years." 3 other longtime residents shared stories about my community service. But Priscilla's coalition fought back with property value studies, legal precedent research, and threats to escalate this matter to state authorities. Wednesday afternoon delivered the escalation I should have seen coming. 2 men in dark suits knocked on my door, badges identifying them as investigators from the Colorado Attorney General's Office, Consumer Protection Division. "Mr. Kellerman, we've received complaints about potential elder financial abuse and property fraud targeting neighborhood residents." The audacity took my breath away. Priscilla had convinced state investigators that I was running some kind of property scam against my own neighbors. The interview lasted 2 hours. These guys weren't local deputies who could be impressed by surveying credentials. They were experienced fraud investigators who'd seen every property-related con game ever invented. But they were also professional enough to recognize legitimate property ownership when it was properly documented. "Sir, your paperwork appears completely in order," the lead investigator finally admitted. "But we had to investigate claims about potential exploitation of elderly residents." "You mean potential exploitation by elderly residents?" "That's not how the complaint was filed." After they left, I realized Priscilla had made a critical error. State investigators don't just close cases, they document them. Her false complaint about elder fraud was now officially recorded as unfounded, creating a legal trail that would be very useful if this escalated to court. Thursday brought her most personal attack yet. A private investigator appeared at my door, identifying himself as working for Hartwell, Morrison & Associates. Priscilla's law firm was conducting background research into my pattern of antisocial behavior and possible cognitive decline. "We understand you have been experiencing difficulties since your wife's passing," the PI said with practiced sympathy. "Sometimes grief manifests as property obsession or paranoid behaviors." The psychological manipulation was breathtaking. They weren't just attacking my legal position, they were attacking my mental competence, using Sarah's death as ammunition in their property war. But I'd been expecting this move. Danny had warned me that desperate opponents often resort to character assassination when legal arguments fail. I handed the PI a business card for my physician, my financial advisor, and the veterans counselor I'd been seeing since Sarah's death. "Feel free to contact any of them about my mental state. You'll find I'm competent, grieving appropriately, and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." Friday evening brought Priscilla's final desperate move. She organized an emergency community meeting at the recreation center, complete with printed flyers, professional presentation materials, and what she called expert legal consultation. The turnout was impressive, maybe 60 people, including families I'd never seen at neighborhood events. Priscilla had clearly recruited beyond Willowbrook Estates, bringing in supporters from surrounding subdivisions who were worried about property rights precedents. Her presentation was professionally crafted psychological warfare. Slides about emergency vehicle response times, charts showing property value impacts, testimony from concerned parents about children's safety and psychological welfare. She'd transformed a property dispute into a community crisis requiring immediate intervention. But the most revealing moment came during the Q&A session, when Mrs. Henderson stood up and asked a simple question. "Priscilla, in 2 years of living here, have you ever once helped clear snow from anyone's driveway?" The silence stretched for 10 seconds before Priscilla deflected to focus on the current crisis rather than past grievances. That deflection told everyone exactly what they needed to know about who'd actually been serving this community for the past 15 years. Saturday morning brought Priscilla's most reckless gamble yet. She'd convinced herself that public pressure could override property law. The Emergency Community Action Committee she'd formed overnight included 12 households, 2 city council members she'd somehow recruited, and a local news crew she'd promised exclusive coverage of neighborhood property rights abuse. The smell of fresh printed flyers and the buzz of coordinated activism filled the morning air as her coalition prepared for what she was calling decisive community intervention. I watched from my kitchen window as they assembled in the street, clipboards and cameras ready, like some suburban version of a civil rights march. The irony was staggering. They were protesting my exercise of actual constitutional rights while standing on property I legally owned. The delegation approached my front door at exactly 10 a.m., clearly choreographed for maximum media impact. Priscilla led the group, flanked by the city council members and followed by concerned-looking parents holding children who'd obviously been coached to look anxious about the steel gate blocking their neighborhood access. "Mr. Kellerman," Councilwoman Patricia Martinez announced through my doorbell camera, "we're here representing the community's concerns about access restrictions that affect public safety and property values." I opened the door but didn't invite them onto my porch. "This is private property. You're welcome to communicate through proper legal channels." The news camera captured everything as Priscilla stepped forward with her folder of legal documents. "Marcus, this has gone far enough. We have a court order here requiring immediate restoration of road access pending a full legal review." My blood pressure spiked as I examined the paperwork. She'd somehow convinced a different judge, one who apparently hadn't seen the full property history, to issue a temporary injunction based on emergency public safety concerns and potential municipal liability for blocked access routes. The order was dated Friday evening, clearly rushed through an after-hours emergency hearing where only Priscilla's side had been represented. Professional, calculated, and probably grounds for her law license suspension when Danny filed our response. "This injunction is based on false representations," I said calmly, but the news camera caught my trembling hands as I read the legal language. "The court has spoken," Councilman Roberts added. "We need that gate opened immediately while this matter is properly adjudicated." That's when I noticed something that made my surveyor instincts kick into high gear. While the adults were focused on legal theater, I could see property stakes in my peripheral vision. Fresh orange flags marking boundaries that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had been on my land overnight, conducting unauthorized surveying. "Who's been staking my property?" I asked, pointing toward the new markers. Priscilla's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "The city commissioned an independent boundary survey to verify your claims." "On private property without permission?" "On disputed property pending legal resolution." The conversation was being recorded by multiple phones now, creating a perfect documentary of Priscilla's coalition committing criminal trespass while demanding I comply with a fraudulently obtained court order. But I could see this was heading toward physical confrontation. The crowd was growing as neighbors emerged from their houses, some supporting me, others clearly frustrated about their blocked access. Kids were crying. Adults were shouting over each other. The whole situation was becoming a circus that would only benefit Priscilla's narrative about my unreasonable behavior. "I need to consult with my attorney before responding to this order," I said, stepping back toward my front door. "Marcus!" Priscilla's voice turned sharp and desperate. "Open that gate right now or we're calling the sheriff to enforce this court order." "Call them. I'll be here." As I closed the door, I could hear the crowd's frustration escalating. Car horns were honking as the blocked access created traffic backups. Parents were explaining to confused children why they couldn't drive to soccer practice. The Martinez twins were asking loudly why Mr. Marcus wasn't helping them anymore. From my kitchen window, I watched Priscilla work her phone frantically, presumably calling sheriff's dispatch to report my contempt of court for not immediately complying with her injunction. The news crew was interviewing frustrated neighbors, clearly building a story about one man's property obsession disrupting an entire community. But I was watching something else. The steady stream of traffic using the alternate route through Maple Street, proving that road access existed. It was just inconvenient. Emergency vehicles could still reach every house. School buses had adjusted their routes. Life was continuing, just with longer commute times. As Danny's truck pulled into my driveway through the still open gate, I realized Priscilla had made her fatal error. She'd tried to use public pressure and fraudulent court orders to override legitimate property rights. When this was over, she wouldn't just lose her access war, she'd lose her law license and possibly face criminal charges for filing false legal documents. The war she'd started with restraining orders was about to become very educational for everyone involved. The showdown everyone had been building toward arrived Thursday evening at Willowbrook Community Center, where Priscilla had organized what she called emergency public hearing on property rights versus community safety. I'd never seen the community center so packed. Every folding chair occupied, people standing along the walls, local news crews setting up cameras in the back. The air hummed with tension and the nervous energy of a community that knew it was about to witness something decisive. Priscilla had clearly prepared for this moment like a trial lawyer presenting her closing argument. Professional easel displays showed emergency response time calculations, property value projections, and aerial photos of my gate blocking Oak Street access. Her PowerPoint presentation was titled, "When Individual Rights Threaten Community Welfare." She took the podium with complete confidence, her voice carrying across the packed room with legal authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight because one man's property obsession has created a crisis affecting 47 families, emergency services, and our entire community's economic stability." The presentation that followed was masterfully crafted emotional manipulation, testimony from parents about children's psychological trauma from feeling trapped. Fire Chief Williams expressing concerns about response times. Real estate agent Sandra Lopez presenting data about property value decline. "This isn't about legitimate property rights," Priscilla concluded. "This is about an elderly man using legal technicalities to hold an entire neighborhood hostage over a snowblowing complaint." The applause was substantial. Half the room clearly saw me as the villain in this story. Then it was my turn. I approached the microphone carrying a simple manila folder and feeling the weight of 73 years of Kellerman family ownership. Danny sat in the front row, his confident expression telling me he was ready for what came next. "Before we talk about property rights versus community welfare," I said, opening my folder, "I think everyone should understand exactly whose property we're discussing." I held up grandfather's 1950 farm deed, the yellowed paper clearly visible to the front rows. "This document shows that my family has owned the land under Oak Street since before any of your houses existed." A murmur rippled through the crowd as people began understanding the implications. "Mrs. Thornfield has spent 6 months telling everyone I don't understand modern community standards, but she's never bothered to research the legal history of this community." I pulled out Danny's chain of title research, county planning documents, and the subdivision maps that showed the gap between legal reality and everyone's assumptions. Every house in Willowbrook Estates was sold with title insurance guaranteeing access via Oak Street, but Oak Street was never properly acquired from my family. For 15 years, 47 households have been using private property without permission, compensation, or legal easement. The room went absolutely silent as the magnitude of the problem became clear. "This isn't one man holding a community hostage," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "This is a community that discovered it was built on someone else's land." Priscilla shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "That's ridiculous. The city maintains that road. It appears on all municipal maps." "Municipal maps can be wrong, Mrs. Thornfield. Property deeds aren't." That's when Danny stood up and delivered the bombshell we'd been saving for this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Daniel Kowalski, representing Mr. Kellerman. 3 days ago, we filed formal notice with the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office regarding fraudulent legal documents submitted in this case." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mrs. Thornfield obtained a temporary injunction last week by representing to the court that Oak Street was public property. She knew from our previous correspondence that this was false. Filing legal documents containing known falsehoods constitutes perjury under Colorado law. Priscilla's face went white as she realized what Danny was saying. Furthermore, she conducted unauthorized surveying on private property and filed false reports with state investigators. The Attorney General's office has opened a criminal investigation. The news cameras were rolling as Priscilla's carefully constructed case collapsed in real time. Councilwoman Martinez was frantically checking her phone, presumably getting legal advice about how quickly she could distance herself from this disaster. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, returning to the microphone. "I'm prepared to sell legal easement rights to this community for the symbolic price of $1 with 3 conditions." The room held its collective breath. First, Mrs. Thornfield resigns from the HOA board immediately. Second, the harassment against me and other longtime residents stops permanently. Third, we establish a community fund for neighborhood maintenance, because apparently some people have forgotten what good neighbors actually do for each other. The applause started with Mrs. Henderson and spread through the longtime residents before reaching the newer families who realized they were being offered a reasonable solution to an impossible problem. Priscilla stood frozen at her easel, her legal career and neighborhood reputation destroyed by her own overreach. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves in public. The easement paperwork was signed within 48 hours, witnessed by more neighbors than had ever attended an HOA meeting in Willowbrook's history. Priscilla's resignation letter arrived that same weekend, a brief, bitter note about relocating for career opportunities that fooled nobody. Her white Tesla disappeared from the neighborhood 3 days later, followed by a moving truck that worked with military efficiency. Some neighbors reported seeing her crying while directing movers, but I felt no satisfaction in her tears. She'd brought this catastrophe on herself through calculated harassment that finally met someone who couldn't be intimidated. The criminal investigation Danny had mentioned was real and thorough. The district attorney's office eventually decided against prosecution in exchange for Priscilla's cooperation in correcting the fraudulent court filings and her agreement to seek professional help for what they diplomatically called stress-related professional misconduct. Her law license suspension became public record 3 months later. But the real transformation was in the neighborhood itself. The new HOA board elected Mrs. Henderson as president, and their first official act was establishing the Sarah Kellerman Memorial Community Fund. Every household contributes $25 monthly, less than they used to spend on snow removal services, more than enough to maintain equipment, fund neighborhood improvements, and provide emergency assistance for elderly residents. The fund's first project was installing a beautiful memorial garden at the intersection where Oak Street meets my property line. Sarah would have loved the irony. The spot where all this conflict began is now marked by roses, benches, and a small plaque reading, "In memory of neighbors who serve neighbors." My morning snowblowing ritual resumed the December after everything was settled, but now it comes with backup. The Martinez teenagers bought their own equipment and handle the younger family's driveways. Mrs. Henderson trained 3 other retirees on proper technique. Even cranky Bill emerged from his house last winter with an ancient snow shovel, muttering about doing his part for once. The community dynamics shifted in ways I hadn't expected. People wave when they drive past my gate, which remains permanently open but serves as a daily reminder about respecting property rights. New neighbors get a proper orientation from longtime residents about Willowbrook's history and values. The Nextdoor app transformed from a battlefield into an actual community resource for organizing block parties and tool sharing. Most importantly, we started talking to each other again instead of at each other through lawyers and social media posts. Jessica Finley's follow-up story 6 months later focused on conflict resolution and community healing. Her piece, How a Snowblowing Dispute Became a Neighborhood Transformation, won a regional journalism award and still gets shared whenever HOA horror stories trend on social media. The Sarah Kellerman Memorial Fund has grown beyond its original purpose. Last year, we funded college scholarships for 3 local students pursuing careers in skilled trades. This year, we're partnering with Habitat for Humanity to build affordable housing in Jefferson County. The fund that started with neighborhood snow removal now supports construction projects across Colorado, but the personal healing has been just as meaningful as the community changes. I still miss Sarah every morning when I fire up the snowblower, but now those moments feel like communion rather than grief. She'd be proud that her death became the catalyst for something positive rather than just another reason for neighbors to tear each other apart over property lines and hurt feelings. The surveying equipment sits cleaned and organized in my garage, ready if boundary disputes ever arise again. But these days, new neighbors knock on my door to ask questions rather than filing complaints with county offices. They've learned that 32 years of professional experience is a resource, not a threat. This spring, I'm teaching a basic property law workshop at the community center, Understanding Your Deed and Your Rights. Because apparently half the homeowners in Jefferson County have no idea what they actually own versus what they assume they own. Danny jokes that I should charge consulting fees for helping other communities resolve property disputes before they escalate to legal warfare. Maybe he's right. There's something satisfying about preventing conflicts instead of just winning them. But mostly I'm content being the neighborhood's unofficial property rights expert, snow removal coordinator, and keeper of institutional memory about what happens when good neighbors forget how to be good neighbors.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.